Hi, I'm Jillian Medoff, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jillian Medoff.
I'd like to thank a few sponsors before we get into today's show, because it's those sponsors that allow us to keep bringing you shows day after day. The Son of Earp series by Chuck Buda, Shifters, Ghosts, and Demons, all set within the backdrop of the Old West. James Johnson, illegitimate son of the legendary Wyatt Earp, dreams of adventure and following in his daddy's footsteps. His mentally disabled friend Carson stands by his side. Together the friends wage war against evil. The Son of Earp series has it all. Supernatural forces are at work and the body count is rising. Can James and Carson save their cursed friend? Will they defeat the haunted gunslinger before more innocents die? Can James and Carson defeat the possessed before the demon hits the Chisholm Trail? Or will the devil win the West? Curse of the Ancients, Haunted Gunslinger, Summoner of Souls. The Son of Earp series is available in paperback, ebook, and audio formats exclusively from Amazon or free through Amazon Kindle Unlimited. Pick it up from Chuck Buda today. There's a link in the show notes. Mad Jones Heretic by Quinn Hillier. Mad Jones Heretic delivers sharp satire on modern religion, politics, and media, all at the same time, along with insightful representations of the vagaries of today's celebrity culture and the lunacy of internet comment threads. Controversies surrounding race and sexual morality enter in as well. Additionally, its setting at the end of the 20th century in the midst of the Y2K computer scare provides the perfect vehicle to dissect millennialist themes as well. Mad Jones Heretic by Quinn Hillier. And Craig Martell and Scott Moon's brand new kickoff to their Dark Landing series. The first book is called Assignment Dark Landing. A frontier world, one sheriff, and all the action one spaceport can't handle. Dark Landing is the wild, wild west of known space. Sheriff Thaddeus Fry will never completely leave the battlefields of Centauri Prime. His new assignment, the Sheriff's Office of Dark Landing, could be a do-nothing job, or it could get him killed. The first thing he learns is that his predecessor's headquarters were bombed, creating the vacancy that led to his appointment. The company man is not who he expected, to say the least. His new accommodations are right in the center of Dark Landing's misfits. He finds one native willing to talk to him and tries to make him a deputy. What really matters on Dark Landing are the mines. Faced with a dangerous collapse that could kill hundreds of workers, he leaps into action and gets the story of Dark Landing started. Fans of Firefly, Bonanza, and Tombstone will love the new series. It's going to be releasing every 18 days, so go pick up a copy of Dark Landing as the series kicks off and watch for it. Scott and Craig were on the show right before Christmas, so go back and listen to that episode and get a full, deep understanding of everything that they're doing. Thank you for listening. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Troy is no longer himself. Kidnapped by aliens infected with the essence of the dead General Tomas, Troy grasps at his only hope of survival. He merges his soul with the alien parasite trying to possess him, leaving him forever changed, and not entirely for the worse. Once plagued by crippling phobias, Troy is now fearless, willing to fight his enemies with his bare hands. But with his new strength also comes a new weakness: women. Tomas was notorious for his insatiable desires, and Troy finds himself constantly resisting temptation, especially the gorgeous, manipulative Alta. Although Alta has convinced the Pyrrhans she's helping them prepare to battle the murderous Reptarans, she's actually meticulously planning to steal their ultimate power source and then abandon them to their fate. Alta won't hesitate to kill anyone in her way, and her deep love for Tomas is Troy's only advantage. He convinces Alta that Tomas has taken full control of his being and thus keeps her trust and his life. While Alta schemes, Troy covertly struggles to save the Pyrrhans and prevent the Reptarans from invading Earth. But first he must wrest back control of his own soul. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Find it on Amazon today. There's a link in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jillian Medoff on the show with me today. She has a brand new book that's releasing soon called This Could Hurt, a novel, and it's going to be fantastic. Welcome to the show, Jillian.
Well, thank you for having me. I've actually listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and they're really interesting. So I'll try to do you proud.
Well, thank you. Because you've listened, you know that we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
I think for me, it goes really far back to age 5 or 6. As a kid, my family moved a lot. And I mean, like really a lot. By the time I was 17, we had lived in 17 different places.
Oh,
and yeah, so I went to 7 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 2 high schools. But I do remember when I was 5 or 6, I was always new. So I had already, been to a couple of different nursery schools. My sisters were both born in different cities. And I remember always being feeling awkward and insecure because I was always new. And even at 5 or 6 or 7, I had this overwhelming need to say something and no real place to put it because I was so self-conscious. And that to me is really what characterizes me as a writer, is needing to say things and having no place to put them. And so then I just started writing very early on, and I never really stopped.
Wow. A lot of kids that move around a lot either become painfully shy or, a little verbose, kind of overcompensating for always being the new kid. Were you one of those, or were you a well-adjusted kid regardless?
Oh, no. I mean, it took me, I guess, until like last Tuesday to become a well-adjusted kid. But I mean, I think I was always painfully shy. And I did overcompensate a little by being boisterous, but it was really only to mask a crippling self-consciousness. And the only place that I really felt comfortable and confident was on the page. So no matter what happened in my life, I was always able to express myself. Whether people read it or not is a whole different story. But I was always feeling like an outsider, always.
Yeah. Well, writers write. There's no requirement to be read to be a writer. And I hate the tag aspiring writer because you're either a writer or you aren't, and whether you're published and all of that stuff, that's a completely different thing. But writers write. It's just kind of in our DNA. Oh,
I absolutely agree. And yeah, no, I mean, there's no, it's kind of interesting because people said, they're constantly like, well, how did you know you wanted to be a writer, or why do you keep doing it? And it's like, it's not really a choice. I mean, it was something that being a writer is like having homework every day for your whole life. And when I'm doing it, I feel good. When I'm not doing it, I feel like I'm missing something. Unless I can express myself, and I'm not very good verbally, I'm much better written. And, that makes me a writer. It's not a choice. It was never something. I mean, who would choose this life? I always say that, like, who would choose to constantly feel nagged by some, invisible force, and then express yourself, and then over and over and over revise, and then get it rejected anyway? I mean, who would choose that life? And I think I was really very comfortable just being a writer. The whole idea of getting published, it never even occurred to me that was an option. I didn't come from a family of literary people. I mean, we were all big readers, but we were like middle managers, my family. We were not involved in the arts, or we didn't have any theater stars. I mean, there was nothing about my family that lent itself to a literary life, except for, I guess, the feeling of paranoia, insecurity, and outsiderness that came from all those moves. You know what I mean?
Right. I love how you're talking about that nobody would choose this life and all of the hardship you go through. And then when you are published and people actually read it, then you're exposing your deepest self to perfect strangers. Like, who would want that?
Absolutely.
But yet we do it over and over and over again. It's so crazy. So you said you guys were big readers in your house. What sorts of things really captured your imagination?
Well, when I was growing up, I always loved reading about people and their interior lives. And so I was very interested in family stories. You know, I started with, I also love mysteries. And so I started with the typical Encyclopedia Brown and Nancy Drew. And then I really started reading inappropriate books for my age. Like when I was in the 4th grade, I remember taking my mother's books. I don't know if do you remember the series like The Bastard, and it was like these sweeping historical books about things that happened in American history, but they were really very intricately detailed, and I just ate those. I mean, I was so obsessed with it. And then I started reading about, I don't know, just like inappropriate sexual situations. And, you know, so there was
perfect for a 4th grader.
Perfect for a 4th grader. And then I started, you know, oh my God, guys, you got to see this. So that, you know, but I was always very, very lost in books because there was really, you know, I had my sisters and we were friends, but we were all different ages. But a book was always something that, I mean, I'm never not reading. You know, everything from like cereal boxes sitting at the table. It's like my biggest panic attack is like sitting on a plane with nothing to read. You know, like I have to bring extra just in case I start something and don't like it. Sometimes I'll even read something before I get on the plane, part of it just to make sure that I like it and I'll have enough to read for the whole flight. But, you know, I've always read everything that I could get my hands on.
I love that. I am the same way. And my phone probably has 100 ebooks on it. And I've always got a Kindle nearby, and I've got a stack of hardbacks. And,
Yes.
You know, I've got them just strategically, you know, placed all around, just in case, you know.
In case, right.
For 30 seconds, I might not have something to read, you know.
Right.
I like that you said you love to read about people's interior lives. Talk about that a little bit. What is it about kind of peeling back the layers and seeing what really goes on with people that intrigued you?
Well, you know, as a perpetual new kid, and also as someone who is more of an observer, and I've always been an observer, the life that people show you isn't always necessarily the life that they truly lead. And so in books, I was always intrigued by the facade of, you know, the very successful man, the happy wife, the perfect children. And then you look behind and you realize that that's just scaffolding, that everything that there's worms and dirt and just gross skeletons hanging out in the back of that family. And I always found that so interesting because, you know, I am unbelievably gullible. And I don't know if that's a trait that many writers share. But for me, if you tell me something, my first inclination is to believe what you say, because why would you lie? And so I believe, like when I see these happy families, especially now with the proliferation of social media, with all of these curated sites where, you know, people look like movie stars and their families look like magazine layouts. And so I buy into all of it. I'm like, oh my God, look how perfect that is. That is like, I want to go on a beach vacation and build a human pyramid. I want to go, you know, trek up Mount Everest. Look at what they're doing. And then when you find out that, you know, only really through books does it come out that people are just as insecure. They're just as, you know, struggling with alcoholism or depression and it was always comforted me. It always comforted me as a kid to know that I wasn't the only one who felt so absurd, you know? And I think books really lend that. I mean, I think more so, I mean, movies do it too, but when you're a kid and you don't have access to as many to as much media, especially when I was younger. There just wasn't as much media around, not like now. But books always allowed me to live a different life or to look at a different life and feel not as alone. I think that was a big part of it too.
As a kid that was always writing, did you write stories about the new people that you would meet and their imagined lives behind the scenes?
Oh yeah, I mean everything was material for me. Everything, like nothing went unnoticed. And I think even as an adult, what I do more or less is sort of take a real life situation and then start imagining all of these fictitious elements to it. So like, for instance, in my most recent book, it's about a stepmother who has to decide which of her children she's going to save in a freak accident. And some of the construct, I have 2 stepdaughters, I have a biological daughter, that sort of gave us a little bit of a structure to work the book around. But nothing that happens in the books happen in real life. It's just I do take elements of real life and then distort them.
Which is what we do as writers. You
Exactly.
You observe and then you imagine the what if behind that.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I don't know about you, but I write from a place of rage, and which isn't very flattering, but it's absolutely true. And so, and it's also that feeling of needing to speak. So what I do more or less is express the feelings that I can't say in real life for whatever reason. And most of those are rooted in truth. They're genuine, true feelings. They're just ascribed to different situations, different characters. And in that way, the process is very satisfying. But I think maybe I'd be better, mentally more adjusted if I did it in real life.
Well, what's really interesting to me, Jillian, is from a novelist point of view, for those that write fiction nowadays, because our society has become so polarized, and social media feeds into that, and there comes a point where people throw their opinions out there, and then everybody piles on, and discourse gets washed away really quickly and buried under all of the flaming. What's interesting for fiction writers is we can take those things that we truly believe, and we can craft a story around it, and it's a whole lot easier to draw someone into a narrative about people and kind of, get to discuss the things we want to discuss that kind of get drowned out in all of the hyperbole and all of the over excited emotions in our kind of social media world today.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, I've always said that I've never not been a novelist. when I was in graduate school, I wrote stories, but I always digressed, and I always went in area, the pacing was off because I just loved a lot of landscape. So my natural bent is toward novels. But to me, even though you learn in English class that a novel is really illustrating themes, and that's all very true, but you're also making an argument. I mean, you're saying, well, this is what I believe. These are the characters that are going to illustrate that, and this is the story that's going to prove my point. So I really believe that, that writers are able to be thoughtful and craft a message and craft stories that entertain us, but they're also teaching us something. And I think that you're absolutely right, that what happens in today's conversations, that it's all about arguing a point that you don't even know if you believe in, but it's more or less, it's part of a larger conversation, and you have to stick to that point. God forbid you somehow expose another part of your personality. I mean, I really find it really very, very disappointing that people are more like me, where they'll believe what they hear without necessarily checking the facts. I mean, that really is hard, because as a writer, even though what happens in my books isn't true in real life, it didn't happen, it has to be true to the universe of the story. So I'm constantly working with nonfiction elements of you have to make sure time lines up. You have to make sure that arguments line up, because within the universe of the book, you're making an argument and it has to be genuine, and even though it's not real. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And not that every novelist needs to be, preaching a point, but we get to open conversation and get people to thinking. I like how you said that God forbid we expose another part of ourselves that we don't want exposed in public. But that's the safety of books and story, is that it gets to take root in us and kind of grow. And I love that.
Yeah, and also you can show diverse points of view, and they can be very valid. I mean, the one thing that I find that really interests me about certain books is that you're showing one event from different points of view, and for each of those people, it's a completely different reality. You know what I mean? And I love that, because I think the more you read as a human being, the more you expand your sense of empathy and sympathy, because you're looking at the same situation from different points of view. Therefore, you have to inhabit that point of view. And I think that makes us more well-rounded people, as opposed to being so isolationist and myopic. And, I am obviously a book advocate. I believe in reading. My kids, they don't necessarily go to books as their first. They don't pick them up the way I used to, and that's my secret shame. But, I do believe that we have tried to show them through example that being a good reader, being a thoughtful reader, being a voracious reader, it really does make you a more well-rounded, empathetic person.
Yeah, and hopefully when all of the shiny wears off of new tech and things like that, books will always be there, to go to.
Oh, I think so.
So when you're out of school and you go into college and you're deciding what career path you're going to pursue, what did you think you wanted to do with your life?
Well, that's what's so interesting, because most people that I went to school with that were writers or interested in writing, they went into publishing, or I don't know whether, they lived off family money, but they were invested in doing the writing as a primary source of life. And I didn't have that kind of confidence. I never in my life ever thought that I would be a published writer. To me, it was something I did that made me feel better, that I happened to be good at, that I studied, but there was no end game for me. The end game was how to live in this world and make money. And part of it came from the fact that we moved so many times. So there was always some sort of financial crunch going on. And so I knew very early on that I had to have a job. And believe it or not, the best place for me that I have been the most comfortable is in corporate structure, because I'm an insider. And so I've had a corporate career. I knew when I first got out of school, so I graduated, let's say on a Wednesday. By that Monday, I was in my job, a corporate job, and I have never left the corporate world. So that's like 3 decades. That's a long time. And so I've had 2 concurrent careers, which was doing this writing at night that honestly, I never really thought it was going to go anywhere. And then being a corporate citizen during the day and going to work and doing my job. And because to me, I don't write well with the feeling of anxiety. I write well from the place of anger, but feeling like I don't know where my money's coming in, I don't know how I'm going to live. I have to have something really like steady Eddie. And then I can be much more, I can be much more I can take more risks in my creative life.
Some people would think, having a corporate job, and the most corporate of corporate jobs, as you've been involved in, would be the antithesis of a creative writing life. But I think that's not true. Because you are surrounded with people and situations. I would think it's probably fodder for a lot of stories if you just open your eyes.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, a lot of my earlier books there's like, for me, there's this dichotomy, and I think a lot of writers have this, some more so than others, is that there's this profound anxiety and insecurity, and then there's also this hubris, right? Because how can you think at 18, 19, 20 that people are going to want to read what you write, But, so you have to have the hubris to believe that what you say is worth putting down on paper and showing people. But I did it in secret, and I did it in the dark, and I lived within these corporate jobs. I started in marketing and then went into management consulting, and people didn't even know. Like I had, even when I published my first novel, I was 33. I was working as a senior consultant at Deloitte, which is, you don't get more corporate than like a Big 5 or Big 4 accounting firm. Do you know what I mean? And I had this novel come out about a dysfunctional family that involved eating disorders and promiscuous sex. And it was like, oh, wow. Like, oh, I didn't know she did that. And then it came out as a movie. So it was like this whole other underground part of my life. But but people really embraced it. It was really nice because it was so different than the day to day. But then, you go through the writer's life, which is, I wrote a second book. I couldn't sell it. I wrote a third book. I sold it. It tanked on the market. Then it took almost 10 years. It took like 8 years for me to sell my third book, which came out in 2012. And so, so having the steady job allowed me to kind of live with all these failed novels or disappointments, not just from a artistic point of view, but also financially. But at the same time, I was starting to get more confident as a writer and as a business person. And so I guess about 7 years ago, I said to my agent, first I said, I think I need to quit because I can't sell anything. And she said, no, let's just take it slow, calm down. I said, but someday I really want to write about work. And for me, it was a big risk because the corporate novels have been traditionally written by men. Even though women write about work a lot, they usually focus on like work-life balance or their interactions with their mean bosses. If you look at books like The Devil Wears Prada, that is a corporate book. It's set in a magazine. However, all of the issues are traditionally female. You know what I mean? Whereas I was more interested while I was interested in the relationships, I was also interested in the business and what happens with the revenue and what happens when someone's caught embezzling. And, so I was interested in what were more male kind of issues. So it was risky to spend. This is another point. I don't know how your other, if you've talked about this in your other interviews, but I don't sell partial manuscripts. I write the whole book and then sell that whole book. So I could work for 5-6 years on a book and then not sell it. So it was risky for me to take on a new environment, the office, even though I was very conversant in it and I understood what I was writing about. I had a lot of things working against me. So, but I figured, I'm at the height of my career. Like I've got so much energy. I've got so much insight. I might as well take the risk. And I'm glad I did, because This Could Hurt really is about a lot of the relationships that I've seen in corporate life. And it ended up paying off. But for a long time, I wasn't sure. I just had to go with faith that what I was writing was important to me. Therefore, it would be important and significant to someone else.
You talked about that a lot of your friends that were kind of writerly folks, pursued that in college and, tried to, go to work for publishing houses and things like that. There are a few exceptions, because for every rule, there are obviously exceptions. But, it seems to me that people that want to be a writer, therefore go to college and get the MFA and pursue writing that way, are rarely as successful as folks that pursue other things and then come back to writing, or let their writing kind of flow through their life experience. And I'm not saying that people 18, 19, 20, whatever, have nothing to say. I'm not saying that at all. But I think it proves out that writers with some life experience seem to have more to write about or more experiences to draw from, because the writer is kind of half reporter and half what-if prognosticator.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, if even looking back at, I mean, if you look at the 4 books that I've written, and Hunger Point, my first book, was, my biggest financial cash cow. And even now I can look back and read it and see it was an immature writer's book. Not that, I mean, the story itself is solid, the writing is good, but I also, I wasn't fully formed yet, not just as a writer, but also as a person. And so I think that having other experiences, being friends with people who aren't writers, being out in the world away from the publishing community, it really does a lot for you. Again, because the world is huge and there are so many people with different experiences that aren't your own. And to be able to tap in them in the same way when you're a reader, being a writer, it makes you more sympathetic, more empathetic. You have more to say. And I think that I am a much better writer, more careful. I'm more thoughtful than I was in my 30s and certainly in my 20s. Part of being a writer and becoming a writer is writing. And to do it over a long period of time, you build a body of work that you create a body of work that builds on itself. So you learn early on maybe how to open or close a scene, how to track a character going through some sort of evolution. But it's only when you really understand the fundamentals that you can start playing with them and circumventing them. Like there's part of my book is told in footnotes, which years ago I just wouldn't have had the confidence to do that. But now I'm like, well, I know the basic rules. I know what I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and take the risk. And I think that comes with maturity and also having nothing to lose. I mean, when you get to a point when you're older, like what's the worst thing that could happen? You write something that fails. You offend somebody. All of those things I've done, right? So I've already lived through my most catastrophic thing when it came to writing was not being able to sell a book. And I've lived through that a couple of times. So you learn that no matter what happens, it's better to take the risk and have the experience than not to try. And I think when you're younger or when you're insulated, you don't have to take as many risks because things are laid out for you. And by that, I mean, I know several writers that they don't necessarily write different books. They stay within their same genre. And I think that's great. It's just not what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to write a second Hunger Point, which was my first novel. I wanted to do something different. And I think having more life experiences allows me to try different, more sophisticated storytelling techniques, but it also helps me take on different types of subjects. I will say that after Hunger Point came out, and then it was a movie, I was asked to write a second book like it, which is a first-person female family story, funny, sad, blah, that type of. It's a genre. A lot of people write those kinds of books, but I said no. I have to move away. So I wrote this really bloated father-son story about Vietnam. Having never been there, knowing nothing about it, but I just felt like I really want to do this, and it ended up failing. But you know what? Some of the characters from that book that I wrote 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I've repurposed, and now they're in This Could Hurt, and they're much more fluid, they're more fully formed, they've had different experiences, so I've had different experiences, so I can bring life to them. So nothing goes to waste, even though it doesn't necessarily pan out when you do it. And I think not having life experience and staying within the confines of the literary world, I think it limits you as a writer, because I think you have to take risks, and when you don't, you just end up repeating yourself.
And you can't say enough about about having a career that pays the mortgage and
Yes.
keeps the lights on and the groceries, so that pressure is not resting on your writing. You talked about not selling partial manuscripts, that your career gave you the freedom to fully finish a book and sell it. I've seen time and again writers that will sell a partial manuscript or sell the first book of a trilogy, and then they sell it, they find success, and then the success is crippling, and they can't finish the thing. We've seen that over and over and over again. Whereas if they had another career and fully formed and finished the thing, it would have been a very different story.
Exactly. I mean, you see that in some of these really big blockbuster books that were sold on, let's say, 60 pages. I mean, 60 pages of a novel is not hard to write. A really good, I mean, I could sit down and knock out
That's a
60,
first act.
Exactly. Yeah. And I could get you so immersed in this world that you'll be like, I've got to read the rest. But writing the rest is very different than writing the first 60 pages, So I've seen several books, and in fact, a couple of friends I have sold partial manuscripts, and then they're like, shit, I've got to write the rest of the book. And it's really hard because nothing feels good as having someone praise your writing. To me, it's almost like that's more of a compliment than anything I can think of. I mean, of course, I want to be thought of as a good mother and a kind person and all that. But the truest essence of who I am is as an artist. And to have someone whom I respect say, you did good, that is like lights me up. And so what happens a lot of times is that people rush, and I know I've rushed too. I've said to my agent, oh, you know what, I'm almost done, because I want to be done, because I want to get the feedback. I want it to be out in the world. And the one thing that really I have found for myself is to be patient and to let things unfold as they're supposed to unfold. That's where the best writing for me comes from. And it's crippling. It's hard because it takes a long time, But I will think about something maybe 4 years after I've started a book, and that might change an entire vantage point or lens that I'm looking at the book through. And that if I hadn't waited, if I had rushed it out, it wouldn't be as rich as it was. You know what I mean? So I think that, to go back to your earlier question, having a job that is very steady, that is always, get up, go in, do whatever, that allows me the freedom to not just wait a project out over 3, 4, 5 years. And in fact, This Could Hurt took 7, but also to turn down other projects that might be more lucrative. Like when Hunger Point came out, I was asked to ghostwrite a memoir for a big celebrity, and I was asked to write a TV pilot, and of course the second sequel to Hunger Point, and I was able to turn all that down because I had a full-time job, or then I had a full-time job. I've gone down to 4 days now, and I was also financially okay, and I didn't have to write something I didn't want to write. And I always think in retrospect, I do think this: would I be more successful as a writer? Would I have a bigger body of work had I just focused on the writing? But I think as a writer, there's a period, I don't know if you remember, between like 2007 and 2009, right around the time of the financial collapse, where publishing went into lockdown. They laid off. Companies were laying off so many writers. They were buying back. They were, selling back manuscripts that they were going to not produce. It was like publishing really had to reorganize itself in terms of a better financial model. And I had a lot of friends that were not a lot, but I had some friends that were writing fiction at the time, and they could not sell novels. So they started writing essays. And that was the burst of the anthology, the essay anthologies. Or maybe that was a few years before. But I never really had to do that. I never had to write essays to make money. And, maybe I've lost something in that way because I don't have as big a name as these people. I don't have within the literary community, I have no name brand recognition. But I was able to not deviate from adult literary fiction. That's what I write. And even though I haven't done many other types of creative projects, the fact that I was able to focus on one medium because I didn't have to sell anything allowed me to become much more proficient, sophisticated, and ambitious. I really believe that. But, you always look at the road not taken, I think.
Yeah, and the lesson is that there's no one right way to be a professional writer. Everybody has a different path, and it just depends on what is important to you. And, the folks that had to write essays, I'm sure they were happy that they were at least getting to write,
Oh, absolutely.
There's no one true path. It's,
No.
That's great. So tell us about the new book. This Could Hurt is the new book. It releases January 9th. Where did the kernel of the idea for this story come from?
Well, like I said, I've had a long corporate career, and most of the career has been spent as a client-facing consultant. So that means that I work with HR executives. I do corporate communications. So I would, for instance, go into a company or let's say JP Morgan, and we would help the executives there communicate with their employees during either big change like mergers and acquisitions or smaller change like implementing a new 401k plan or medical plan. So I had a really deep understanding of HR, but it was really from a peripheral point of view. And so in 2009, I got laid off, or 2008, and I went for a year in-house to an actual HR department, and I started working for this woman who was very, very very difficult. She was a bully, and she tormented her staff, and she lied. And I always, she told me in confidence that she had had a stroke a few years before. And I sort of wondered if that accounted for her erratic behavior. And also she seemed to be sort of losing her faculties, like she drifted off during meetings. Excuse me. And over time, I left the department. But she did have this staff of senior managers who, there was a finance guy, there was a benefits woman, and they all supported her and really helped cover for her when she drifted off. And I found myself covering for her too. So I got really interested in what it meant to work for someone and have, and then see their more human side, because at work we all have these different facades that we create. But if someone has a mental breakdown, or they have some sort of medical incident, as employees and as coworkers, how do we react? How do we work together? What do we do? What do we tell? That company, but it really haunted me, that whole situation. But of course, I write also from a comic point of view. So my interest in it became more about, well, let's say I had a boss who has a stroke and goes into the hospital. Do I go visit? And if I go visit, like, how long do I stay? Do I hug her? I mean, do I touch her? And do I sit on a chair? Do I sit on the bed? Like, all of that to me, even though it lent itself to some comic, it was also very poignant, like, how do we interact with our coworkers when boundaries are crossed? And that really led to This Could Hurt. I mean, it started as a story between this woman who was faltering and the guy who heads up recruiting. In his name is Rob. He's more of a Gen X kind of guy, like in his 40s, very disillusioned, completely burnt out. And she's saying to him, Rob, you've got to get your shit together. You've got to figure out, you've got, 20 more years of employment. And so that's how the book started. And then it became like this panoramic view of all the other people in her department. And I set it right after the crash, so everybody's on edge about their jobs. And I decided, you know what? I'm really interested in the intersection between work life and home life. And so each character you see coming to the office from home, and then you look at how their home life bears on their work personality and how it what the consequences of what it means to work with people for a long period of time and how those relationships evolve.
And because everything comes full circle in life, this goes right back to when you were a kid and fascinated with the dichotomy of the public face and the private face.
Exactly. Oh my God, exactly. And also how we grow up. I mean, what it is to mature, because each of these characters comes in sort of mature in some ways, in different ways, because I did the whole spectrum of, they're a diverse cast. You have someone from they're in their 20s, someone in their 30s, someone in their 50s, and someone in their 60s. And so you're looking at how they interact, not just individually, how different age ranges, how we work together and how we solve problems, even though we're at from what would ostensibly be a place of conflict. You know what I mean? Like, you're looking at someone who, like the guy who's in his 30s, he's really like, he wants everything done. Let's go faster. And his boss, Rosa, is much more of a measured, thoughtful type. And she's constantly saying, you've got some really is. You have to calm down. We're not there yet. And so I was really interested in these areas of conflict and then exploiting them for storytelling purposes. I mean, I also think that as far as this could hurt, it was really almost like I only said it in HR as a second, it didn't occur to me to set it in HR. That was a choice only because I had worked in HR for a year and I knew about HR. I mean, I could have said it in the legal department if I did legal consulting, you know what I mean? But now what's so fascinating is that HR, everyone's talking about HR and the role of HR. And it's like, people have asked me, in fact, my publicist said, aren't you prescient? Aren't you, like, didn't you see that coming? And I'm like, I didn't see it coming at all. You know what I mean? Like, it just, because if I had, the book would be 7 years from now, right? I mean, it wouldn't, I just did that as that was just a choice I made that wasn't consequential at all. And now it's fascinating to me how people are talking about HR. And I'm like, look, HR has it's constantly been undervalued. It's been underestimated. People have thought of HR as the place that, that's where they do your forms and that's where they plan your birthday parties. But in fact, in the last 15 years, HR has become a very big partner in the course of strategic planning, and HR wields a lot of power. And I was just thinking how I was glad that I'm really thrilled that my book is able to illustrate the role of HR, but also humanize it. Because on one hand, HR knows everything that happens in the organization. And a lot of people don't realize that. In fact, as I was writing this, I was working with an editor and she said, so wait, HR knows everything? And I'm like, most of the time, yes. I mean, things come in with, and your name is blocked out, but HR does know everything. That's why there's so many laws about HIPAA and confidentiality. But, what's so great though now is that people are looking at HR and saying, okay, well, if HR knew about a lot of the sexual harassment and stuff like that, why didn't they say anything? And it's not, but the thing is like HR doesn't only advocate for the company, for the employee anymore. HR also has to advocate for the company. So there's a lot of, different conflict there that I wanted to mine. Like, for instance, Rosa finds out one of her employees is stealing. So she has to figure out, okay, he's my friend and I really love him as a person, but what obligation do I have to the company at his expense? You know what I mean? And it's the same thing where, an HR employee has to really assess the value of the information, because in business, information is currency, right? I mean, information is leverage, and then secrets become the what you can trade. So she has to sort of decide what's good for him as an employee, what's good for him as my friend, and really what do I owe to the company which is my employer too. So I thought that was a really kind of multidimensional way to look at certain events. I never thought in my wildest imagination that they would actually be happening at the same time, you know?
You talked earlier about some of the great, corporate novels, and most of them had been written by men, but that's inconsequential. What do you, for the readers, what do you think they will be most pleasantly surprised about with this novel?
I think, is it people who know me or who don't know me?
No, just readers in general.
Okay. I meant readers who have already read my books. I think, because I think if you read my previous books, you will be surprised that this is a very big leap in terms of ambition and scope. But just for general readers to come to the book, I think they'll be surprised at how funny and how warm it is, even though I'm dealing with subjects that are very cold. I mean, corporate America, there's a lot of underhandedness. There's a lot of scheming, and I do really get at the nut of where those intentions come from, why people screw each other over. But I also think people will be surprised at how full the storytelling is. I mean, I really tried to show the different points of view and also not demonize corporate America. I mean, I do say, corporate America is difficult and self-serving, but I also think I truly believe that employers want to be good to their employees. I don't think they set out hiring people hoping to undermine them and cut off their benefits, but they have to make choices. Employers, they have to say, well, we only have $100. Of this $100, $50 goes to medical coverage, and we have to figure out what we're going to do with the other 50. Therefore, we're going to have to cut maybe some fringe benefits. Maybe we're not going to be able to have lunch on staff at on site anymore. And employees, by nature, want as much as they can get. But there has to be some sort of compromise between we're able to do this for you, but we can't do this. And I think readers will be surprised by how they come away with a feeling of better understanding about the nature of business in America.
And always with a good novel as you come away feeling the humanity of it all.
And the humanity, yeah. That was my big, I said to myself, you know what? There is always greediness. You can always read about underhandedness, and you can always read about someone getting hurt. But one of the things that I really thought about this book was, how do we find our humanity in a place that is constantly just, pushing for the bottom line? Like, in that world, there's got to be some humanity. And I think readers will be surprised to find that, you know what, I didn't know this about the working world, but it's really different than what I thought.
The novel is called This Could Hurt. It's available January 9th. Jillian Medoff, if people are experiencing you or meeting you for the first time with this interview and with this book, where can people find you online to follow you and find out more about you and your work?
Well, I have a website, JillianMedoff.com, and it has all of my reviews and links and interviews, but you can actually reach out to me directly at JillianMedoff@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I would love more than anything to hear from you and about your work experiences. I'd love to hear about your layoff stories, because I'll tell you mine,
Awesome. Jillian, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They reverently slipped Jason's giant-size X-Men #1 from its mylar protector. Drinking in the sweet aroma of browning paper and 3-color process that signals only the best and rarest and most wonderful of collectibles. On one page, Professor X raised his fingers to his temples and rallied his X-Men, his psychic commands radiating from his bald head like waves off hot asphalt. I have psychic powers, Owen blurted. I want Wolverine's claws. Jason was turning a page. Snicked. Or, hey, get this. Lightsabers poking out the backs of my hands. Or even, no, I'm totally serious. I have psychic powers. No, you don't. I do. Jason laid the comic on the bedspread. He sighed. Owen could be such a spaz sometimes. Okay, he said indulgently. What number am I thinking of? Stop, it doesn't work that way. What I can do is called a psychic reading, off an object, like getting impressions. When the doorbell rings, if I put my hand on the knob, as soon as I do, I know who's there. It's called looking through the peephole, moron. Shut up! And when I touch the phone, I know who's calling. I'm sure, Mr. Bullshit from Bullshit Mountain. Like my sister or my grandmother, I just know it's them. There's no such thing as psychics. Okay, you try. Don't be stupid. Are you chicken? Fine! Okay. He snatched up a brown paper bag, spotted with grease, and dumped a few stale French fries into the trash can. I'll put an object in this bag, and you try to guess what it is. Turn your back. Jason did, and heard a rustling behind his head. Okay, you can look now. Owen produced the bag. It was rounded with some object now. Don't touch yet, just think. Try to imagine what's inside. Your lunch? Jason sneered, but he closed his eyes and tried to imagine. He could hear Owen's breathing. Jason's nose itched. His brain grew bored with nothing to look at, and fragments of images swam in and out of his imagination. Strawberry, he blurted. Owen reached into the bag, producing a white bowl. Jason had eaten Frosted Flakes from it about 3 days ago. A few stuck to it, like little beige fish scales. See? I lose. No, look here. Owen pointed. A design went around the sides of the bowl. A long string of vines and painted fruit. With strawberries. That's... Jason began, but didn't know how to end the sentence. It's cool. See? What did I tell you? Do it again. Jason closed his eyes. An image like daisies and sun and... Yellow, he blurted after 3 seconds. Oh my God, open your eyes! Owen held a bright yellow highlighter pen. I hadn't even put it in the bag! And so they went, for 30 minutes or more. A staple remover, a toy soldier, a sweat sock, a pencil. Jason never said precisely what was in the bag, but it was always close or related. He'd imagine a cockpit, and Owen would produce a game controller. He'd say plate, and the object would be a CD. He made right angles with his pointer fingers, shrugging, only to have Owen pull out Eliza's knitting needles. His friend became more and more enthusiastic, but Jason became a little scared. You have a real gift, Owen said. You're brilliant. Owen babbled for a long time about astral projection and ESP, how Jason was picking up signals from Owen's own psychic powers, which had obviously been doing the broadcasting. Owen left that night full of plans and experiments, vindicated in his beliefs. Jason sat on the bed after Owen left, thinking hard. He had no explanation for what he'd done, but he knew he hadn't faked it. He couldn't believe, but he couldn't deny either.